Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Isabella Sekenekia. I am one of the co-founders and directors of ELNOR. I am honored to welcome you to our first conference this September 2022. First and foremost, on behalf of all of us at ELNOR, I would like to thank you for joining us at this special event. The team and I would like to extend a special thank you to those of you who have been continuously present in supporting us and our work while learning with us over the past almost 2 years. If you're new to the ELNOR community, we would like to formally welcome you and thank you for taking your time to learn with us today. And we hope that you are moved and inspired by the community just as we are daily. Before beginning our speaker series, we would like to ask that you please remain muted for the duration of the conference. If you have any questions, please submit them via the chat function in Zoom. We will be monitoring for any questions that we might be able to answer immediately in the chat function or propose to our speakers. Next, please stay mindful of the diversity in this virtual space. We have members from our community that have various different walks of life. And so we just ask that you keep that in the forefront of your mind as we listen to our speakers and audience members today. Finally, please refrain from taking screenshots or recording our speakers. The first 3 sessions will be recorded and made available to you upon request, or perhaps on our website or YouTube channel in the future. So here's the outline of what to expect for today's event. First, we'll start with, of course, this introduction, then we'll move into session 1, which will discuss ELNOR's research, the most recent research trip that we took to Greece about education access within camps. Next, we'll hear from one of our trauma-informed psychologists who will be speaking a little bit more about trauma-informed practices within the spaces of forced migration. We'll have a 10-minute break. And then our third section will be on the higher education opportunities for refugees. We'll hear from 2 individuals within the space then. And we'll conclude with our final panel, which is on the future of humanitarian aid within the space of forced migration. And then we will say goodnight or good afternoon with closing remarks. And so a little bit of background about ELNOR. So we are a nonprofit organization that provides English language education virtually to adults in refugee camps and contexts within Europe and the US. Stanton, you can go ahead and flip to the next slide, please. Thank you. So here are some photos of us on some past trips where we were engaging with our partners and beneficiaries on the ground. So since October of 2020, we have grown quite well in size. So now in our active volunteer team, we have 42 volunteers. We've served over 285 students, conducted 4 field visits where we delivered educational supplies, just books, pencils, and printers, as well as done research on the ground. And finally, we're up to over 13 weekly lessons. And so here's an outline of our programs and what we're currently offering. So in addition to one-on-one English tutoring sessions, we do have group classes, as well as IELTS preparations and sponsorship. And for those who don't know, the IELTS exam is an English language certification exam that individuals will use to apply to universities, apply to jobs, and just have an overall proof of their English level. And so we do sponsor those and teach IELTS specific classes, as well as provide support for job, internship, and other types of applications that our students might need help with. And so understanding the importance of education in the broader sense, ELNOR commits to advocacy and aid through research. And we hope that the data that we collect and the analyses that we produce will help inform the general public, policymakers, fellow NGOs, and other actors with decision making. To learn more about ELNOR, you can find us online. We're at elnor.education, on Instagram with the same handle. And finally, any questions that you may have, or if you want to volunteer or partner with us, we are elnor.education@gmail.com. Next up, we have our first session, which will be led by Stanton, our research program manager, Murad, one of our research volunteers, and Hudabash, who is an interpreter and an ELNOR student. And they will be speaking about their findings from ELNOR's most recent trip in Greece. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming. Today, we'll be talking about ELNOR's most recent research conducted in Greece this summer. My name is Stanton, and I'm ELNOR's Research Program Manager. With me are Hudabash, who volunteered as an interpreter on this project, and Murad, who was a volunteer researcher on this project. We draw on various research cited in our report and at the end of this PowerPoint, including our own articles available on our website. With respect to some participants' privacy, an edited recording of today's full conference will be made available on our website. We encourage you to return to ELNOR's website next week when the final report will be published. Next slide, please.
Alongside our researchers, Murad, Victoria, Rina, Stanton, and Atifeh,
our research is the culmination of so many efforts, including the interpretation of Hudabash, Ali, and Zainab, the translation of Yashar and his mother, and the coordination of our hosts, Mohammed from Afghan Migrants and Refugees Community, or Afghan MNR, in Athens, and the Irida Women's Center in Thessaloniki, as well as the Yoga and Sports for Refugees program in Lesbos, and many more who participated in or otherwise enriched our summer research. Thank you all. Now Hudabash will speak briefly on his experience in interpretation work. Next
Thank
slide,
you.
please.
When I was on Lesbos, I volunteered as an interpreter for the camp clinic. Almost everybody, whether or not they are new to the island, respects your work, so it offers you a lot of meaning and skills. I know I wish I had someone to help me more when I was first living in the camp, when working. By the middle of the day, you feel tired, of course, but most of the time, I was enjoying it because I felt I was helping. I felt a lot better at the time doing something with my day. All day I was interpreting on medical topics with shifts from 8 to 2 or 3 p.m., covering everything from paracetamol to midwifery, hypertension, and strokes. When people arrive, they go through government and UNHCR interpreters. But afterwards, they could come to the clinic and I could interpret for them and their doctor whenever they need. I was working without appointments every day, and at some point, 1 to 2 days a week, other organizations needed interpreters, so our managers would make an appointment for us to help elsewhere. So during the busiest years, I worked 7 days a week on continuous shifts. But by 2022, I was normally working only 5 days a week with appointments. The number of the people from whom you interpret really depends. Sometimes in the clinic, 200 to 250 per day, but by the end of my time there, it was only like 2 to 200 per week. Some patients took an hour or longer, and some just 15 minutes. Through it all, I remember that the doctors really cared about us and we all looked out for each other on the job. When I was briefly interpreting for ELNOR this summer, it was a different experience. It was more formal, and I already knew Stanton before. I was still motivated and happy to be doing something different. People did not speak so openly because we were asking important but less serious questions than physical health. We walked around more, met lots of people, and lots of people were very interested in talking our survey for themselves or about their children. They had a good feeling about the ELNOR researchers. They were happy most of the time I was interpreting, and they were asking their own questions about what ELNOR could offer. They always wanted to know how to access ELNOR's courses, even though we weren't advertising. Other than the sunshine and walking around a lot, it was easier than the unair-conditioned work at the clinic, which I still loved and was still looking forward to get back to. These days, English in France is a bit weird. I cannot speak French, but English in France is quite useful. Most of the time, French people find English useful and can help you. When you go to a country whose language you don't know, it's hard to communicate and carry out even a daily life with basic human connections. France is a big country. It's hard to communicate and find organizations. My social worker speaks English, which is such a relief for me. I'm lucky for that. Many people are denied asylum outright in Greece because they can't speak with an interpreter of a major language, so they can't even start their applications. I will learn French, but for now and from now on, it's important to have English skills like me. Thank you.
Awesome. Next slide, please. Between June 20th and July 8th, 2022, ELNOR staff and volunteers conducted research to learn about children's access to education in refugee camps in Greece. Since at least 2015, Greece has been receiving at various times the greatest number of asylum seeker arrivals in Europe beside Italy and Spain, though not the greatest number of asylum applications in Europe. Its refugee accommodations and anti-refugee security activities have been criticized by international, European, and local NGOs alike for several years. Its neighbor, Turkey, hosts the most refugees worldwide at 3.8 million people.
In its research, ELNOR was focused on learning about how the right to education was and is being held or denied in these camp settings. Over a period of roughly 3 weeks, researchers connected with individuals and families in Exarchia, Athens, across from the Kartape refugee camp on the island of Lesbos and in central Thessaloniki.
We set out to gauge the availability and quality of educational experiences provided by formal, state, and NGO programs. And we did this by collecting data from parents, as well as former students, through our mixed methods approach. The data fell within 3 main categories. The first was survey questionnaires, interviews where we took greater notes while filling out a questionnaire, and then audio-reported semi-structured interviews. All of these were carried out with the aid of interpreters. We also acknowledge that further methods will be used in future research to more thoroughly evaluate individual programs, since in terms of this project, we looked at broad insights from the beneficiary testimonies.
ELNOR is founded on the principle that everyone has the right to education, found across international laws. In this project, ELNOR sought to find out how and whether or not such rights and needs are provided. This research can inform policymakers and the wider NGO community, as well as activate more people to get involved to improve such situations.
Previous ELNOR research on the ground confirmed that respondents face a variety of significant obstacles to educational access, like a lack of internet access in camp. This earlier research also found that the majority of respondents identified learning English as one of their most significant educational goals. One of our upcoming report's major contributions to the literature is bringing primary data from people who have lived in refugee camps themselves about what critical resources children were and were not able to access. Next slide, please. The data in these images are relevant as of last Thursday, the 22nd of September. Greece has already seen over 10,000 arrivals in 2022, as compared to about 9,000 arrivals during the entirety of the year 2021. Just over half of arrivals into Greece in 2022 are from the Palestine-occupied territories, Afghanistan, and Somalia. In the EU broadly, in June 2022, the most asylum applications were lodged by people from Afghanistan and Syria, followed by Venezuela, Colombia, and Pakistan. The Mediterranean has seen approximately 100,000 arrivals in 2022, with the Turkish Coast Guard reporting an additional 250,000 people stopped from arriving this year. Next slide, please.
Though our project focused on school-aged children, which we defined as being between the ages of 6 and 18 years old, who were present inside Greek refugee camps, we did not allow minors, aka anyone below the age of 18, to directly participate in the research. As such, the target population for our questionnaires and surveys were the parents and or guardians of school-aged children, as well as young adults who were formerly students in Greek refugee camps.
Between subjects of the parent survey and those who took the former student survey, 45 people were from Afghanistan, 4 from Iran, and 1 from Pakistan. We know that the whole refugee community in Greece includes communities from Turkey, Palestine, Syria, Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, and DRC, and more. Though people from Afghanistan make up around 17% of arrivals this year, they are strongly the majority in our data because our research was conducted through partners directly linked to Afghan communities in Athens and Lesbos. 44 total surveys were taken in Farsi language with many notes. ELNOR analyzes in our research.
58 documents, meaning questionnaires and interviews, were retrieved from 39 parents, 17 of which self-reported as women and 11 men. Respondents' children were an average age of 13.9 years, with a median and mode of 15 years of age. The decision of whether or not to record child ages was left to the parents and or guardians, and we respect that many were left blank.
17 documents were received from 17 former students, people who had previously been educated in NGO or government-provided school programs in Greece. The 17 were adults at the time of our survey. 6 were men and 7 women.
In their interviews, some respondents did discuss informal education in places like Moria camp, provided by refugees themselves for years. Moria was a largely informal refugee camp, which was devastated by a fire in late 2020, a precursor both to the construction of Karatepe camp, Karatepe 2.0, and the founding of ELNOR. We should also mention that many adults in refugee camps and other contexts do formally volunteer in NGOs. Though none of our NGO worker respondents, which is another part of our research we don't report on today, none of them were refugees themselves. We faced burdens of access and interest in surveying or interviewing NGO workers themselves, specifically in educational programs that were actually within the camps. Next slide, please.
Respondents lived or had previously lived in 13 refugee camps or similar sites. Similar sites refers to properties like hotels refitted by the IOM or other authorities. Such similar sites are further discussed in ELNOR's audio-recorded, semi-structured interviews alongside squad and the dramatizing closure of camps like ELNOR's camp was closed this summer, and such experiences are quite traumatizing.
Our data doesn't indicate whether someone spent a full year or just a few months in a camp, but we know that 2019 saw the greatest period of respondents living within camps. We did not ask whether people had experienced homelessness outside of camps. Though we asked about years 2015 through 2022, No one surveyed was recorded to be living in a camp between 2015 and 2017. Of those who answered the survey or the question, 65% of people had lived in a camp at some point in the year of 2019, while 81% of those who lived in a camp in 2018 also lived in a camp in 2019. About approximately 70% of those who lived in a camp in 2018 also lived in a camp in 2020, while 71% of those refugees in camp in 2019 were also in one in 2020. 37 of those who responded to the question reported living in a camp this year.
37%. 2019 does not show a peak in arrivals to Greece or through the Mediterranean in general, but 2019 does correspond with significant increase in decision outputs by the Greek Appeals Authority, which might see many people leave both safer and less safe places for camps following negative or positive decisions, respectively. 2019 also saw a spike in boats stopped and landings or arrivals reported by the Aegean Boat Report in 2019. Land passage through Evros in the north remains the primary point of arrival for those seeking asylum in Greece. Though it is uncertain what the future holds, the stark drop in arrivals and asylum applications recently has been attributed to the global pandemic and other countries' lockdown measures, as well as illegal pushbacks. Next slide, please.
This chart displays the camps that had the highest number of individuals surveyed over the last few years. There are about a half dozen more camps that respondents had surveyed, but the graph starts to look a little bit messy afterwards. It'll of course be available, the full report will of course be available when the full report is released on the ELNOR website.
Next slide, please.
We asked whether there was an education provider to their knowledge at any point during their time in camp. 67.5% of respondents said yes inside camp, and 49% said yes outside of camp. Of those who said there was a provider in camp, the vast majority said the provider was open 5 days a week. We also asked how many days students attended.
Next slide, please. Dissimilarly, of those who said there was an educational program physically outside of camp, a slight plurality noted that they only usually attended 3 days in the week. We also saw an increase here that many educational programs outside of camp were purportedly open only 3 days per week, but still the majority said programs were open 5 days a week. Next slide, please. We asked people how many hours on a normal school day they attended their educational program, and most reported 2 or fewer hours. In the future, we hope to see that what changes could be made to camp life, NGOs, and educational frameworks, and all of their relationships to the state, donors, and others to improve this situation. We should note that the regular operating hours of many Greek primary and other schools is around 5 hours per day, double that of many of our respondents' school time. Next slide, please.
Inside and outside of camp, language skills remain the most reported by respondents. We want to emphasize that the lack of skills reportedly taught in both settings. Between parents and former students, only 22% and 6%, respectively, of those who responded about any skills also mentioned math. Not only does math serve as an international language, it aids development of other skills and is integral in general scholastic advancement.
Next slide, please. In conclusion, much work is needed to secure the rights to education of so many stuck in the asylum process, not just in Greece. This and more research, including primary quotes, in our upcoming report can aid in shaping our and others' programs, in educating the public, and in developing future greater research. Tens of thousands of people are awaiting asylum decisions in Greece, but still many have received unjust negative decisions from deeply flawed evaluation systems, and many still have decisions pending or have received a positive decision only to end up living on the streets or deported by violent flukes in a detached security system, or worse.
What opportunities individuals and families can find are critical to success and daily life. Programs like ELNOR's seek to provide some opportunities and assistance to adults. But asylum systems in Europe must address needs broadly for children and adults. Conflicts and displacements are now a continuous part of everyone's lives. Globally, and Europe, like the rest, needs to pick up the slack and begin securing the livelihoods of those who are ready to begin anew.
And the last slide is our citations, and you can find our work on our website and in our upcoming report, as well as in the recording of this presentation, which should all be on the website within 1 to 2 weeks. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Stanton, Murad, and Hudabash. That was great to hear from you and some of the findings from the research. We will now be moving on to a presentation by Alpha, who is a former student with ELNOR and also an advisor to ELNOR. And we are really grateful to have him speak today. He has just completed a program at the Central European University, where he has been selected to begin his master's in sociology and social anthropology. So without further ado, Alpha, if you would like to introduce yourself. Alpha, can you hear us? Okay, sorry. Isa, if you want to, excuse me, sorry, Isa, if you want to take over, I'll get in touch with Alpha.
Yeah, no worries. I was actually going to say, I think we might have time for 1 or 2 questions while we set up our next speaker. If anyone had questions for the ELNOR team about their presentation, you can go ahead and submit them into the chat right now. We'll take about a minute or 2 and we will address them.
Hello, Elizabeth. Can I ask a few questions?
Sure thing. Go for it.
Yeah. Elizabeth, I would love that when you finish the presentation, it is very interesting. And if you can share us by email, that would be perfect.
Yeah, we'll do. We'll get Stanton to send that over.
Yeah. The other thing is because I'm outside of Athens, and maybe I cannot continue to stay with you guys long. So that would be very nice if you can share with us by email. Thank you so much.
Will do. Thank you for taking the time to stop by, Mohammed. Stuart?
You're on mute.
Are there similar reports being prepared by groups such as yours in Spain, in Italy, or other areas of high concentration of refugees?
I'm not completely certain at what level. I'm sure that there are large NGOs doing this, as well as smaller NGOs, which have done it in France. And I believe there were some at the time of Moria. I'm not completely certain to what level this kind of research. Ours is not, we would love to find research that's even more developed than ours. I'm not sure that one at ours or at an even greater level has been done for Karatepe camp in Greece. And I'm not sure about Spain or Italy as well. Sorry.
I think your research is impressive.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions for our team, I would like to say thank you to Stuart for that question. And I would like to introduce our next speaker, who will be Dr. Danny Meyer. She is a trauma psychologist, the founder of Cologne Counseling, and one of ELNOR's advisors. She has extensive experience working with forcibly displaced individuals, and particularly those within the LGBTQ+ community. She'll be speaking to us today about trauma-informed mental health practices. And I will go ahead and pass the mic to you, Danny, whenever you are ready.
I'm ready. Hi, everybody. So greetings from Budapest. Actually not at home right now, and I'm hoping the Wi-Fi works with me. We never know on the road. I'm at the Euro and Central Asian Lesbian Convention, which is, they're trying to get a million lesbians together across Europe and Central Asia. Why I mention this is because I always have to change my presentations right before because I get inspired. And it's been a very inspiring last couple of days because of also thinking about people displaced for identity, sexual orientation. And these folks are also sitting across from many of you much of the time, not at home. So there's been a lot in my mind. And then also even just thinking about assessments, intakes, collecting data, it lends like very nicely into what my talk will be because of what we feel in different disciplines, comfortable asking people, and is it safe to ask them questions about the deep past versus the more recent past? And what got me kind of excited is to see we actually, in my field, have less research about the quality of life within the camps itself. We tend to be more deep in the history. So I think it'd be nice to combine work, get a full picture of the human experience. I'm going to jump in, share my screen because I had to change it as usual. Here we go. Hopefully you see that. Maybe thumbs up, Isabel, if you see it, because I get lost. Thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm at this convention right now, and the meeting I had before this was about lesbians and war. Okay, I know this is a niche population, but like I said, it extends over. The part that was interesting for me was we were listening to testimonies about survivors fleeing Ukraine and Armenia, just to take a pick. And while I was watching them, you could see while they gave the testimony, the emotions were rising. Some were getting a little bit blotchy in the face, some tears were coming, and they were pushing these emotions down to be able to communicate the story to the audience. And we could see that the way they were telling the story, then the audience was actively listening, very much there, and they were also having this emotional response. And so it just created this really beautiful, safe setting in the room where the stories were getting across and they were feeling very heard. And I was thinking about why did these people share the story today? To be able to create this moment. And quite frankly, I think it's because they were asked. They were asked if they wanted to share. And they chose to share because of this actively listening audience, being respectful and so on. And I was thinking about survivors and that there's this typical trait in the last 10 years of my individual work, the last 20 years of our work groups research, is that a lot of survivors have this very deep desire to just go from the rooftops and scream the whole story, share the account, let the whole world know what happened to them. However, quite often, when they do share the account, this is met with some type of judgment or criticism or frustrating inaction, and this happens over and over, and so they just stop sharing. Or some people never try to share. Maybe they've not been asked. Maybe there's no one that they want to tell. But then there's this element, and this is where the clinical psychology comes in. Some people, they're unable to share the story. It's complicated. Or they're really experiencing the story and some words are coming out, but to the listener, it doesn't make as much sense. Okay. And this is also really frustrating. And this is kind of why I come in to the ELNOR scene and really like to be in these spaces, because you're on the ground, on the front line, directly interacting with these folks. That I'm giving you this general summary, but I'll tell you, with conservative estimates, we're looking at probably 9 out of 10 people, whether they're leaking it, showing it or not, they're sitting with a very serious, repeated and complex traumatic experience background. And so when thinking about these survivors of multiple and complex trauma, they also have this belief a lot of times that other people won't understand what happened to them. And they have this because they don't understand what happened to them. And then the other trait with trauma survivors is they're fiercely protective over the vulnerable. All right. So this safety and protection that wasn't afforded for them, now they try to provide from others. So even if you do ask the story, they might try to protect you from it because it's so horrifying. They'll leave parts out, they'll self-censor, all sorts of stuff. So they're trying to protect these innocent ears. The problem is this leads to further isolation. And isolation is gas on the fire in terms of clinical symptomology. This is the, let's see, take you a little bit more. This is what leads us to the symptomology. There's a kind of a new broad umbrella term now, rather than just post-traumatic stress disorder. We have trauma spectrum disorders. And it's this isolation of, I'm the only one who's experienced this. No one will understand me. I can't share this with anyone. This fuels the symptomology. Okay, and the symptomology looks like, you'll see the left side of the screen. Of course, we have classic PTSD in my field, classic PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. This is the clinical definition for folks who have typically survived a lot of different event types. Okay, so you can have natural disaster, explosions, war, interpersonal violence. These are all event types. And so they've experienced many of these different types. Complex PTSD, complex trauma, this also tends to be a lot of repeated experiences of the same event type. So if you have gender-based violence, interpersonal violence, domestic violence, child abuse, you'll have complex PTSD. All right. But I don't like for people to take away that we're just talking about PTSD and complex PTSD. We need to understand that this isolation fuels this fear and despair. It fuels depression. You'll see depressive symptoms on there. Anxiety, suicidality, chemical coping, insomnia, nightmares, flashbacks, anger, hypervigilance, chronic health conditions. All right, so in a lot of the camps, some of you might have noticed what we call kind of a trauma cough. So there's just this constant clearing of the throat, a cough. You have autoimmune disorders are more likely in traumatized populations, even diabetes, Crohn's, and in general, an impedance of daily functioning. And this is important when somebody's trying to attend a language lesson, for example. If you're not sleeping, if you're always on edge, you can barely take a shower, you don't feed yourself very well, and then you try to show up someplace on time, you don't even really understand what day it is or where you are. It's going to make learning a little difficult, right? And so when thinking about, okay, in this type of field, why aren't we asking folks about before? And I think a lot of times the answer I'll get is like, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, that's not my job. And I'd kind of argue with folks is there are not enough therapists, there are not enough psychologists, there aren't enough people. And it's anyone on the front line who's directly interacting with someone with a traumatic history. It is a little bit of our job to think about it, but why aren't we asking? We feel ill-equipped. We don't have the skills for talking with folks about this. There's also a level of respect for the survivor. I get that, because if we're thinking of this question of what brought you here, which is a question that they're asked over and over. And we know this out of respect to them. We know they're asked this at police stops, at border crossings, for asylum interviews, over and over, what brought you here? And for example, if I ask any of you the same question, what's the first thing that your brain does? What brought you here? Typically, it's going to scan events that you've experienced. And it's going to take the meaning that you made from those experiences, and it's going to organize all of that. And then it's going to offer an answer to the question, what brought you here? And even as I say that, it's highly reduced and it's not even actually true. If I ask you what brought you here first, you actually have a kind of somatic physiological reaction, emotional reaction even, that comes first, just from the prompt. All right, and this can look like, typically it will look like, if I was going to put anyone on the spot, what brought you here? There will be some type of increase in heart rate. Maybe the hands get a little sweaty. There will be tension in the body. All right, and this could be the same for the person who's nervous, who has a lot of experiences of, I don't like speaking in front of groups, kind of negative valence. Or it can be the same bodily symptoms for somebody who's excited. They like speaking in front of groups. All right, so with positive valence. But regardless for all of this, all right, that process of, okay, navigating that emotional and physiological response to the question, to then organize past events, to then create an answer to share. This happens in somebody where the brain and the body are in kind of smooth communication with one another. All right, clear pathways between the two. However, people with a lot of traumatic experiences, this is not smooth at all. There's a lot of disconnect. All right, so when we ask them, what brought you here? Something really interesting happens. And don't worry, I won't go too brainy. But just a quick scan that's really important for all of us to know is about hippocampal involvement. You can ask a question about the past to a person with a trauma spectrum disorder, and the hippocampus goes offline. It just goes out. Or shades of dimming, all right, as you can see on the right, the various levels of activation for the hippocampus. And you can kind of, I think, an accessible example for most people is thinking about a child at the chalkboard. All right, answer this math question in front of the class. And then, oh, it just went blank for a second. I can't remember. Even though I know this, I can't remember it. It's kind of a common experience. All right. And we can understand that that happens because of stress. That makes sense. However, the stress of the people we're talking to, this is not just any stress. This is high stress, chronic stress, historic, repeated stress, life-threatening stress. And what's important about this stress is it impacts memory. It impacts when the event was happening, how it was encoded in the brain. All right. And then it has some follow-up impacts later. But here I want to be clear, like two parts of the brain that are interesting for how memory is consolidated. We have that hippocampus that I mentioned before. We kind of explained to people it's up here in the cortex. Then we have the amygdala, kind of in the back. This is like our primal side. And these two parts of the brain, the amygdala and the hippocampus, are normally working very nicely together. They store memories that are rich. The hippocampus provides the when and the where something happened, the context. It's cold memory if we reduce it down in a way that makes it easy for people to understand. So it provides the context of when and where. And then you have the amygdala, which brings all this rich detail. Okay, so this is all of the senses, sight and smell and taste and touch. Okay, and then goes into emotions and physiological reactions. And normally these two are working very nicely together. So if I ask someone about a positive event, if you give an example of a first kiss with someone that they really liked, all right, they can say when and where it happened, and then they can even re-experience a little bit of the excitement of that moment while they share the story to another person, and the other person can understand what happened that day. However, what you'll see here is if stress continues across, it gets really high, the brain can kind of handle, it seems from the research, maybe 20 minutes before this thing kind of happens here, where we'll see that the hippocampus, because of cortisol, basically, starts to dip down. Where's my mouse? Dip down, starts to go offline, and the amygdala, our fight and flight warrior, jumps on and kind of takes over. All right, and the two are split. Not yet. The two are split. All right, so basically what the person will have from just this one peak is that they remember and experience all of the body and the emotions, physiology to what was happening, but they have lost the anchor of time and space, the label for that event. This little disconnect happens. Here's kind of a brief rundown of our work group's conceptualization for cold memory and hot memory and the hippocampus or the amygdala. I think what's important for everyone here, and I'll send you whatever information you want, or we do a training later to go more in depth with this, but is the point is that these two systems are now disconnected. All right, so again, just to be very clear, the when and the where is separated from all of the other information. And that's essentially why the past is experienced as the present. All right, it has no tag that belongs back then and there. They experience it as here and now. And so this is like a little drawing I use of basically how I feel when folks with a lot of events come to us and are across from us. So life has been handing them these stones. A stone will be any super stressful event in terms for net that I'll discuss later. And that the average person can kind of, we know from the research, handle maybe 12 to 15 stones, and their memory will still work. They still have the hot and cold memory functioning together. The amygdala and the hippocampus are still connected, still working. They don't have symptoms of PTSD yet. But if life keeps handing them more stones, more traumatic events, more stressful events, chronic stress over a long period of time also counts. This disconnect's going to happen, and we're going to start to see symptomology. All right. And then, so thinking about the person on the right with just crushed under all these stones, of course, they can't get a shower, feed themselves, or do their homework or show up. Learning is really hard. And part of it's because this when and where the event happens, since it's missing and they experience the threat now, it's just always with them. All right, so I tried to give an example. Okay, this is how we break down essentially what's happening. It's a defense cascade. You've heard of fight or flight, most likely. There are lots of Fs in the especially pop psychology world right now. Don't worry too much. These move around. But I think an accessible example of how we can explain it to folks is, let's take an example of a person's walking in the woods. Get my mouse again. They're kind of at their baseline. They're walking in the woods, they like it, and then they hear something. This is this initial freeze or orienting response. The eyes get big, they get a little bit stiff, the ears also get big, and they try to identify, is there a threat or not? They hear some rustling over there. And let's say, unfortunately, they look and they see that there is a bear in the woods. All right. This is involuntary, all right? The sympathetic system activates in the body and they're ready for fight or flight. Okay, the stress is very quickly going up. The amygdala is activated. Hopefully, we need it to help us mobilize for this threat of the bear. This is where the heart rate goes up. This is where the hands get a little sweaty, all right? We're pumping and ready for action. All right, but let's imagine that the bear is now running at the person, at you. Big bear right in front, very close. You can smell the bear, you can feel the bear. All right, this is where fright comes in. This is the peak stress moment. This is the cognition, I'm going to die, the most terrible moment. The fright moment of an experience for the person, this is where the sympathetic system has the foot all the way on the gas. And now we have the activation of the parasympathetic system in the body. This is the shutdown part of the body. So that foot is all the way on the brake. All right, so all systems go. And essentially, I mean, you've seen those, like the goats, that if you surprise them, they get super stiff and just fall over. That's also one of these moments. That's what's happening inside the body. So it's really important for trauma-informed care, for example, this spot that a lot of people find mystifying and don't know about is that at peak fright, what we have is there's a suppression of anger response. All right, because if we fight back against this bear that's way too big for us, we're actually more prone to more injury. And so it makes sense to stay stiff, but we need to keep pumping so that in case the bear gets distracted, we're able to run away. All right, and so I think in fright that most of the people that are across from you have experienced is there are moments where they're terrified and they're frozen and they can't even scream or call for help or do anything. They have this moment of, I just stood there and I couldn't do anything. And this is really important because that's where also some shame can come in later in retrospect. These are events people won't talk about, whether it's sexual assault, didn't you fight back against your attacker? Or it can be, oh, the soldier was hurting someone over there and I did nothing. So this is a very rich pocket for human experience. We'll have to go into more detail another time. But then basically the other right side of the, I don't know, chart here for flag and faint, this is where the parasympathetic system takes over, recognizes there's no escape from this bear. You can't fight this bear. It's time just to basically go to sleep and hope that he gets bored and just leaves you alone. There are lots of mechanisms around this. So thinking about this bear example. All right. This is one event in life. And as I showed you, people with lots and lots and lots of events, those stones in that image, all of these build up. All right. And they're interconnected. It creates a fear network in the brain. It's our wisdom, if you go by Gabor Mate, the wisdom of trauma. All of those experiences, they learn something. They learn basically something else to be afraid of, to protect themselves. And this just builds up and up and up. And if you take that person and they're running away from the bear in the woods, like the bear's actually there. And then I ask them, hey, you want to have an English grammar test? Even though the person had said before the bear arrived in their life, hey, I really want to learn English, just as an example. Right now, in that moment, not only is it maybe not so helpful for them, but they also won't do very well. They shouldn't. It's inappropriate. They shouldn't be learning something new for the future while there's a direct life threat in front of them. Okay, so that can happen in a lot of the camps. This active direct threat is still there within the camp. We know about the violence within the camps, what's going on. So we have the here and now direct threat and presence, as well as the bears of the past. Okay. And so that's the example to use, is that maybe it's a nice camp. Maybe their family's with them. Maybe everything's kind of stable and okay now. But the bears of the past are still running through their mind. All right. So when we're trying to teach them new things, they're kind of a little bit with us, but the mind is always over there wondering when that bear is going to show up again. And then, sorry for the work that we all do. We know that it also is never over. The people in front of us, they have the bears of the past, the present, and of the future. So there's a lot of wisdom. We want them to keep this with them, just to be realistic. Okay. What do we do with all of this? Oh, that's okay. Put a bit better image. But basically, I'm coming in to talk or to present a little bit about narrative exposure therapy. Don't worry, organizers, won't go too much longer. But it's an approach that is based on now 20 years of empirical research. It was developed specifically for people displaced by war, violence, all the things that the people you're talking with have experienced. This is an approach that was designed for helping them. Okay, and so it's an approach that is supposed to and seems to do. I've done it myself for 10 years with refugees and asylum seekers to Germany. I'm based in Cologne. But essentially to help organize all of those things that happen to them, but help them put the when and the where labels on those events, so that what's in the past stays in the past, and they're able to kind of be here and now with you as they prepare for the future and all of the things in front of them. What NET essentially will look like. This is my little teaser. All right. So I mentioned those stones. Those are the traumatic events in life, chronic stressors, negatively impacting events. You can see an example from a real person, a Kurdish person fleeing, made their way to Germany. All right, we can see a lot of stones. This is a lifeline. I made it super skinny so nobody can really read it. But so we have all of the stones kind of organized with life. And that would be kind of classic psychology. It's just to focus on the bad stuff. But NET is about contextualizing everything. We find there's healing in contextualizing it because of that hippocampal involvement and getting it reconnected with the amygdala. So we need context all the time. So in NET, we use a lifeline approach. You can see the little rope. We start from when they're born, and it goes all the way to here and now and coiled up for the future. And we'll definitely have these stones. It's a trauma-focused intervention. These stones of what they've experienced, but you can see there are also some flowers on there. We want to take positive events from life, moments of connection, pride, joy, anything like this. So we'll have the negative valence events, the positive valence events, make sure we have those. You can have extra symbols for loss. We can have tea lights for people that they've lost along the way. And then there's a forensic version, which is particularly useful for people coming from combat zones, where there are sticks that you can lay down to represent maybe times where they hurt someone else, or through inaction, somebody else was hurt and they feel guilt or shame. Why do we do all of this is because, like I said, that chronology is missing in folks with traumatized brains. Everything's floating around at the same time. So what we do is kind of through intake assessments, lots of checklists. We'll kind of get the basic stones of what they have. And then we have these flowers coming in, and we're going to put everything in chronological order. We are not going to talk about everything, because that would actually fuel more of the symptoms, because you'll see that that's very disorganized and kind of a chaotic process. But for Lifeline, you see it's on a Post-it, and we try to just get when it happened, where it happened, and what you would like to call that symbol. And then we move on to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. This is the Lifeline part of NET. All right. Then essentially, depending how much time we have, how many weeks, how many sessions with a person, kind of have a few of these events, not all, that we're going to go into a deep conversation about, a very specific conversation about what exactly happened that day or at that time. All right, in this conversation, I can show you from the manual. It takes a lot of practice, but it's also quite intuitive. And I find that non-mental health professionals do a lot better at this than lay counselors. But essentially what we're going to do is really try to understand what happened. We're going to ask a lot of questions. And while we're understanding what happened back then and there, we're going to also be checking in here and now. What is it like for you now while you tell this story to me? And we do this because it's a bit of a pendulation between back then and there and here and now. But we do this because it helps really make it clear for the person what belongs in the past and what is here and now, and working through it. And then at the very end of these, whatever events you pick to have the longer exposure style conversation about, whoever is the therapist or the lay counselor, the listener, the other human, they will type up what they understand to have happened that day, past tense, first person, just an account of what they understand, and they'll read it back to the person. And then the survivor can say, they can add detail or edit or whatever, make sure that it's as accurate as possible. And then at the very end of NET, we essentially have kind of, it's a little book of the events in chronological order that then we read back to them and sign our names as a witness. They sign their names and we give it to them. And they have this account. Why do we do all of this? Is because we see that all of those symptoms for the trauma spectrum disorder, they go down. And they're feeling much more here and now and curious about the world around them, ready to learn whatever it is that they're going to need kind of for the future. Why am I bringing it to ELNOR? Because psychologists, this thing is for therapists. As I mentioned, as I mentioned, it's not just for therapists. So NET is designed for dissemination to lay counselors. As I also mentioned, there are not enough people to do the work of helping them get situated here and now. So I bring it to anybody at the front line who works with folks with a significant trauma history. I'll get past this. The final thoughts, no, I'm a whirlwind for you, but is what can we do? And then my formal recommendation or advice is that for anybody who works directly with a person with a lot of traumatic experience, before you know NET, all right, you need to acknowledge that you're a trauma worker, whether you think you are or not, all right? You work with trauma. And so that means that there is an obligation to be trauma informed, to understand what the basic nuts and bolts of trauma are, what's happening there. That's part one. And then the second part that I think is the most challenging for a lot of people is you really need to know your own story. You need to know yourselves, your own traumatic past. It needs to make sense to you, so that when somebody with trauma in front of you presents themselves, that your own stuff isn't jumping in between, and that you're actually able to kind of sit and listen and receive. Good. Yeah, I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much, Danny, for your presentation. It's always so fascinating to learn about this human cognition and how we navigate the world given our experiences. Does anybody in the audience have any comments or questions for Danny before we take our break? We have about 3 to 5 minutes. Oh, Stanton?
Hi, Danny. That was super interesting. And I was wondering, when it comes to how someone develops their story, or I guess presents their final story to a case officer for decision-making process on their asylum decision, how useful, like how much overlap is there between NET, like a lot? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Please.
No, it was part of actually even in the development of NET. So I personally use these testimonies. They go to the lawyers, they go with BAMF, like the different organizations from the government in Germany. The basic motivation of a lot of the folks is I never have to tell this story again. I have it typed down forever. I sign it as a witness and it counts in court. They're used in Den Haag for human rights abuse trials. These have been used before. So it's useful beyond. Also, if they even just the basic part of need to go to see a therapist later, that they don't need to repeat the whole story again, they can just give this document to that therapist. Lots of uses.
Thank you. I also had one more question, but I can wait if anyone else.
I don't see any other hands popping up, Stanton, so I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor.
Thank you. I was wondering also if we have some students who maybe sometimes they'll say like, they'll be speaking English very fluidly during class. And then even if they don't like get noticeably tired or lost in an answer, they'll mention that they think they don't know English anymore. They think they're losing their English, even though they might be in a setting where they use English every day, not just with class, but outside as well. And I can understand them quite fluidly, like very easily in class. Can you speak at all to why people might say those things?
No, what is funny is that for language learning and consolidation, it's also in the cortex, it's at the front. And we know that trauma is also stored by language. And so I think for them, I would actually be wanting to understand the context of what's happening when they're having that experience of, I think I'm forgetting it. Because I'm guessing in the trauma network, it's linking over to a specific event. That then whenever this element is triggered, that then they're having this sense of like lower confidence, or I would guess they're getting a bit foggy, or because we know once the amygdala is activated, the whole cortex starts to get foggy. You can see it on their face, and then access to language decreases. This would kind of be a classic like trauma response to me. It's just interesting that for them, it feels language specific. I don't know, I have to know more.
And it looks like Alpha
Cool,
has
thank
a
you.
hand.
Yes, of course, I have a question. Thank you so much for your presentation. I have a question. Of course, I had been interpreter where I was working with refugee or migrant at the hospital. It was in Greece, but before I was working at those clinic which were in the camp. But there is something that I have been witnessing myself as an interpreter that I'm still thinking, and I'm going to ask you this. Most of the time, some patients who were coming to hospital, basically because it was Mitirini main hospital, which was supposed to be offering some advanced, let's say, services, noticed from patients. So where they had, of course, most of them patient, not being treated maybe the way they were expecting. They were overreacting, very angry. And then I was trying to talk with them, and most of the time, those patients, they have something in common that I saw. Then maybe we tell me if there is any connection. Most of them, they were people who had some good position or maybe consideration back in their societies. But other people who were just, let's say, normal people, like who didn't have some status in the society, it was just somehow. Do you think there is some connection with their attitude there, even some psychological? I don't know, just I want to know if there is some connection.
I'm sorry if I missed a little bit in the middle.
Yeah, it's fine, I can repeat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just what I'm saying is, my experience was when I was an interpreter in Greece, I did in camp and then out of the camp at Mitini Hospital. So most of the time, patients who were coming to main hospital, whenever there is a delay to receive them or maybe to not receive good treatment in terms of the way they were taken, maybe let's say not being respected, kind of, what I saw was overreacting from them, being somehow aggressive, not being patient, comparing it to others.
Okay.
And then I was thinking, maybe there is something behind, because what I saw was most of those who had such attitude were people who used to have let's say, better position or consideration back in their societies where they came from. I talked to people from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Congo, from Somalia. I had chance to talk with them. Then I'm wondering if you think, or maybe, there is some connection. This.
Okay, no, thank you for the restatement. Now I understand. I cannot speak to causality when it comes to the position that they had in life before. I think that also would make sense. I can speak for irritability and being short with patience or anger. These are symptoms of PTSD. So because I mentioned at peak fright, the anger is suppressed in the body. And so it's just like a pressure cooker there. So if you work with people with active PTSD, they're quite irritable and difficult to work with. And I train people to understand this is like a compliment, that they feel safe enough with you, that the anger can leak out many times. We will see with complex PTSD, not this. A lot of people who've had a lot of violence from a partner or a parent, they actually have other coping skills. The anger, I don't know, they're like fawning, people pleasing, the opposite. So speaking in a traumatology perspective, I would categorize like this first. And then once I know there's not active trauma disorder, then I would start to wonder about causality for their prior position in the country of origin, which makes sense.
Yeah, because most of the time when I was talking with them, they were saying, "Do these people know me? Who I am, who I used to be?" No. Then I was like, maybe there is some connection.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds kind of straightforward, of the frustration of now being in this new place.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Alpha, for a fascinating question and anecdotes. And thank you again to Annie for your time. We are going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and we'll reconvene at 25 past the hour. And that way we will get into Alpha's presentation about his experiences in higher education. So we'll see each other in 10 minutes. Okay, it's 25 after the hour. Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic on to Vic, who's going to introduce our next few speakers.
Okay, thank you very much, Isa. So now we're going to move on to a presentation from Alpha, who I'm very excited to present. As mentioned, he's a former ELNOR student, advisor, and our early conversations almost 2 years ago were critical in helping us form ELNOR's mission and its curricula and how we see its role as an organization. So it's my honor to introduce him. And he is now pursuing a master's in sociology and social anthropology. And following his presentation, we will have Ruth Nyakarario, who is an academic director at the refugee-led research hub out of Oxford University. And she joins us today to discuss higher education opportunities for refugee adults. So without further ado, I will give it over to Alpha.
Hey everyone, and thank you so much for the time. I don't know if I need to present myself as again, but I can do it. As you said, my name is Alpha, but of course my name is Alphonse Ndayisaba, and I'm from Burundi. So, and now I am in Vienna, in Austria, and I'm doing my MA at Central European University. This is what I'm doing right now. I remember when you asked me to talk on your conference, I was like, what am I going to say? Like, where do you want me? Because I have my personal experience of over 7 years as refugee, almost maybe 1 year here in Vienna, some years in Greece, some years in Rwanda, in refugee camp, some time in Turkey. I didn't know exactly where to start. But I'm going to be short to connect with your project or your NGO, which is helping refugees or asylum seekers to try to find a way by education. Are you going to be moving slide? Yes, we can go to the next slide. Yes. My presentation actually is going just to have like 3 points, if I would call them like this. I will start to talk about what does becoming refugee or asylum seeker mean from me person who has such experience. And the second, I'm going to connect with language because I think it's very important, especially because of this is one of services you are providing from your organization. And I'm going to talk about why and how it is in this setting. I'm saying refugee camp, it is your savior, you know, it is key for you to navigate somehow. And the last I'm going to talk about how language can unlock your future through education. Next. Of course, maybe I am biased a bit because when I was doing this presentation, this background of this slide is colors of the flag of my country. Maybe I miss my country. I noticed after, maybe this is why I did it like this. Give me just some second. I want to charge my laptop. I didn't know that is going to shut down. Yes. I'm going to talk what is becoming a refugee. When I was choosing this term, I was referring to that people, they are not refugee because no one for me is born refugee, just they become refugee. One day or maybe one morning you wake up as refugee. This is why I use this term, and I think this is what I was referring to. Next. So for me, when you become refugee, there are maybe 3 things that you found yourself in a situation characterized by those three things. One morning or maybe afternoon, I don't know, when you become refugee, you become disempowered, where you are cut off your power or maybe strength, because when you are refugee, you don't have like almost you don't have anything, so you are disempowered from almost every aspect of your life. And again, most of the time, according to my experience, you are marginalized. First time, you are marginalized from your own community. For example, people who are fleeing wars, you are separated and you are marginalized by other people who are staying in the country. Because I remember when I was in Rwanda, when I was talking with my people from my country on the phone, I became strange to them. They say, oh, these people who are in Rwanda, they're doing this. I was like, but I'm still Burundian, even if I'm in Rwanda. So there is a cut between you and even your people. I was like, sure, I didn't think this before. And again, in the hostel community, they see you as a victim. And again, in some sense, you are a victim. So in that time, you are victimized. And again, if you are in that situation, you are vulnerable and you are suffering. Maybe this is obvious. Everyone can understand this. But there's something interesting that I found out in the whole this process, or maybe in the whole this experience, that of course, even now at some degrees, I am still experiencing or maybe suffering from. There is this idea of becoming resilient. Because I do believe that maybe me this time talking to you, I have some resilience that I developed at some degrees. And I do believe that every refugee has some resilience, maybe different degrees, but I do believe that everyone has this. And for me, this is one of the positive things I can say that I had through all this experience when it comes to personal growth or maybe personal development. You go next. And then I was thinking your project, how you are helping people by teaching them. So far, the most thing I know you are helping refugees is just teaching language. This is what I know from your organization. And then I was trying to connect how the language is very important, personally for me, and even for others around me, because I still remember in Greece, of course, I came in Greece speaking English. Of course, I developed somehow, but I have witnessed how English language skills has helped people to improve their way of navigating that experience, or maybe their life, and be in a camp or maybe out of the camp. So I'm going to talk how and why it becomes your savior, as I said. Can you go next? So it helps in two ways, basically. How? When you are in those settings, you found that the most thing you want is express yourself. You need to talk. And the problem is, I am from Burundi, where I speak Kirundi. I am in a camp in Greece where no one speaks my language. Or maybe I'm from Syria, where I used to speak Arabic. And I'm in Greece where maybe no one speaks my language. Of course, I might be with other refugees that I came with, but most of the time we speak with people that we are asking services, maybe doctor, maybe asylum services. We wait service from there. Maybe I go to the city to buy anything, you know. So this is where you find yourself in need of that language to communicate, and you need the language. And we are maybe lucky because English is worldwide language, and it is very important. Again, sometimes you go even to see, like, I remember when I was in the camp, there are some NGOs where you need to go to talk for yourself if you need something. But maybe you can do next, then I can tell you exactly what I mean by this. Next. So you need that language skills to do yourself advocacy. Why? Because when you are in the camp, you can't expect that people, they will be advocating for you. Because for example, I remember sometimes you are in the camp and let's say maybe you didn't have cash on this credit card they give. Sometimes you need to go to talk. Not every time there is interpreters. Yes, if you don't live in the camp, you think, no, but this organization, they are professional, they have the interpreters, each language you find, but it is not the case. I can give testimony, Bahiri, for example. My language, Kirundi, no one, which means the only way I was surviving was because I was able to speak either French or English, which means there's some languages where you can't have any service. It is horrible. Even in asylum services, they were saying at least we should speak Swahili, but Swahili is not our language. For example, in Burundi, no. Swahili is spoken in Tanzania and Kenya, meaning that if I couldn't be speaking one of those international language, I would have difficulties. And again, there are even some examples of people from West of Africa where they came speaking their native language. And the asylum service saying, no, we don't have interpreters for your languages, which means you need that language for self-advocacy, even for other daily struggles as when you are in the camp, because you need different things and it is not always easy to communicate. You need definitely the language skills that the one you are providing, which is amazing. And moving further is how this language, especially English, is helping for me where I'm studying now. I remember applying for this scholarship. I didn't have time to teach me English. One of the criteria was speaking English, which means if I couldn't be speaking English, I couldn't get this scholarship. So I would say for me, knowing English has been the passport or maybe the key to have access to this scholarship I have now. But sometimes I try to think back and I think, let's say someone is from Tanzania and maybe speaking only Swahili, or maybe is from my country, Burundi, is speaking only Kirundi. And now the question is he able to get any chance to learn here in West or maybe wherever where the teaching language is not our language? The answer is definitely no. And again, I can imagine if maybe I can be from, because again, I was with people from Congo who don't speak English, who speak their language, which is Lingala, and even some French. None of them now is at university because they don't speak the language, because they are lacking this language, which is like the passport or maybe the key to have access to education. So this is where I think knowing a language for me is maybe not everything, but very important. And this for me stress articulate the great interest I found in your organization while you are teaching people, because you are not just teaching, but you are even opening the door for them in the future. I am here to witness this. Yeah. So basically, this is what I have to say, because I don't take too much time. But I'm happy if maybe anyone can have just any question to me, even if it can be personal question, no worries, I can answer, and then I can give time to others. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Alpha. And thank you very much for your presentation. I think we have time for potentially one question from the audience. So if there's anyone who wants to raise their hand. Stanton?
Hey, Alpha. Thank you so much. I was wondering about Lingala and other languages in Burundi, as well as in neighboring countries. How easy is it to understand each other, not necessarily in a conversation, but in terms of the amount of time it takes to study the language before you're able to help someone else to translate, maybe?
Most of that, yes, most of time, of course, I'm going to connect with the job I did as a volunteer to be interpreter. most of these people from Congo, because they were the one who speak Lingala, we didn't speak Lingala because personally I don't speak Lingala. So I was trying to help them mixing two languages. One which was French. Of course, they might speak French, but of course you have to go to school to speak French, even if French in Congo is spoken, but some they might not speak good French. But I was mixing French and the Swahili, because even in the Congo there's a part which speak Swahili. So I was trying navigating those two languages to find a way we can communicate. Because at the end of the day, I was the one to help them, because I was trying it. Let us just try. If they don't speak good Swahili or maybe French, we found. This is how I was just trying to help them. Because either Swahili and the Lingala, they are all those Bantu languages, so they have a lot of similarities.
Are they similar similarities or are they different similarities? Like, will 3 languages have the same similarities, or will 2 have the same and then another 2 have different ones?
Yeah, I would say let's just maybe be specific. For example, Kirundi, my language from Burundi, and Kinyarwanda from Rwanda, they are almost the same, at 98%, almost the same. And if you talk, for example, Swahili from Congo and Kenya, I can understand a lot of things from that language, because they have a lot of similarities. And again, if you talk about Lingala from Congo, still there's some similarities. Of course, not so much, but you can connect and try to get something, you know? This is what I mean, because those languages from East Africa, where I came from, they are Bantu languages. They have a lot of similarities, of course, at different degrees. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for further questions for Alpha about his experience at Central European University, or other questions about learning foreign languages, please do ask them in the chat. We're going to begin our next presentation. So Ruth, if you would like to begin, we will show your presentation here.
Hi, everyone. So nice to meet you all. It's been lovely listening to you all. Hope you can hear me clearly. Just give me a thumbs up if you can. Okay, thank you so much. I'm joining from Nairobi. It's about almost heading to 8 p.m. Kenyan time. So I'll be sharing today more about the Refugee-Led Research Hub and giving an overview of the different academic programs we have. And they're mostly dedicated and modeled and designed for individuals who have at least lived experience of displacement. And it's an, we can go to the next slide. So a quick overview of what I'll be sharing in the next 15 minutes, 14 minutes now, is an introduction to the Refugee-Led Research Hub, an overview of the different activities that we have, and I'll share more about an online course that might be of interest to some of the learners who you're working with, especially now with the English language aspect coming in. And then I'll share more about graduate applications and scholarship support, and something that we have also, and more about our next steps and useful links that you can share. So a quick introduction to Refugee-Led Research Hub. It was established in October 2020 by colleagues who, majority of whom have a lived experience of displacement. And it's a project of the Refugee Studies Center at University of Oxford. The whole idea is to have refugees and individuals with a lived experience of displacement be at the center of knowledge production. And that's both in academic access and also through research. So conducting research from independently from start till finish. And I was quite delighted to read and listen to more about the initial research that's presentation that was given when this majority of our colleagues and affiliates, and during our festival that we had early this year. And that's to mention that we have a physical presence in Nairobi, so operating both in Nairobi, Kenya, and also University of Oxford. Next slide. So a quick overview of the different activities that we have at the Refugee-Led Research Hub. They can be divided into two main, so an academic aspect and a research aspect. So for the academic part, of which I am a coordinator, we have the Pathways course. So this is a 10-week online foundation course in refugee and post-migration studies, and it's delivered by Oxford faculty to learners across the world. We are just completing our second cohort, and we had over 205 learners from the world over and different levels of education. So from individuals who just finished high school to those who have an undergraduate, those without undergraduate, those who are in their graduate study, and those who are in their doing their PhD. It's been such a rich experience. I wish I could have some of the learners with me here today to just share what the experience has been, but we'll be having a graduation soon, and we'd be happy to invite some of you to attend and listen to their reflections. So this course is a deep dive into refugee and post-migration studies. It's designed closely related to the Masters in Refugee and Post-Migration Studies. And then still within the academic pillar, having completed that, it leads you to the different pillars that we have. So our research program and our academic program. Some of the learners that we have advanced to the graduate scholarship support scheme that we have. And this scheme is to support those who are keen and ready to join master's programs and doctoral programs, mainly now at the University of Oxford, where we have a base, and other universities. And while on that, I'll definitely mention this when I'm coming to it, but soon, but we'll be having call for applications for the support program opening up soon, end of this month, which should be tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow my end. We also have fellowships. So for someone who's gone through our links or looked at our work initially, you might have gone through and read about a fellowship, a 12-month fellowship. So that was a pilot fellowship. But going forward, we might be having a 3-month fellowship, which would be more research oriented and be in a much more advanced level. And then so post the path professional placement. So we're really keen on thinking about honored pathways. What happens after you finish one level with us? What's there? What can we offer? What can we offer through our partners? So these are 3-month attachments with partner organizations to conduct research and practice related to displacement. That's for those who are also not able at the moment to go to graduate school, or are not keen to go to graduate school, but want to be more professional. And then still within the research, our research sector, we conduct independent research projects from start to finish. So some of the projects are also collective, and we have just completed one of our major research projects. It was called the Refugee-Led. It was on refugee-led organizations, and all the research leads were actually individuals with lived experience of displacement. It was a multi-country study. And I'll share after this, I'll share, when I'm taking any questions that we might have, I'll share links to our report that has just come out. And honored opportunities, we hope to have more individuals getting into policy, practitioner, and research careers. And the slides that follow will be just breaking down of the different sections that I've talked about. So talking about the pathways, which might be of interest to many. So it's a 3-month online course in refugee and post-migration studies, and it's particularly and only for learners who've been affected by forced displacement and based anywhere in the world, and enrollment is free. Upon completion, learners normally receive a certificate. And this course is designed in such a way to support learners to progress to advanced academic and research opportunities. And also it's a really good entry into forced migration as a theory, as a field of study, because majority have the lived experience, but do not do not have the knowledge behind how people, like how other people, people like me with no displacement background have written and thought about displacement. And I think it's very important to have those who are affected at the center stage of how knowledge is being produced. So the current cohort, as I mentioned before, started in July. We're completing tomorrow. It consists of 205 learners based in 50 plus countries across 6 continents. And there are 30 countries of origin represented, 105 identify as women or non-binary. It's such a rich class, I must mention. Next slide. This is just a pictorial that shows the different areas that where our learners are coming from. So the red pins is where they're currently based. And actually it's almost closely the world over. And the green pins is where they're originally from. Yeah. So more about the Pathways course, I'll focus mostly on, because this might be of interest, on the topics that are covered. So the first week, we normally look at Introduction to Refugee and Post-Migration Studies, and then we go to history, and then root causes. That offers like a really good introduction to post-migration. And then thereafter, we now look at the different disciplines that I used to think about post-migration. So from anthropology, politics, to law, to gender, to ethics, and finally completing with much more practical outlooks. So thinking about economic lives and also questioning durable solutions. And one thing that makes this Pathways course stand out is it's semi-synchronous, and there's lots of support that goes into enabling learners to have a rich experience. So we have tutorial groups, we have advanced seminars, tutorial groups where learners in small groups of about 5 to 7 meet to discuss about the content of the week, and then advanced seminars where we have critical reflections and readings on the same. We have lots of enrichment activities that happen weekly, where we have guest lectures or screenings or workshops, one-on-one support from academic coach. And also we normally have a writing workshop just to introduce learners into writing academic essays. We'll be communicating more, and I'll share our website and also the different places you can read more about us once the call for the next cohort is communicated. And also this time we'll be including an asynchronous cohort, which will be mostly self-guided. Just to mention from the different applications we call for applications we made, like the last one we had over 900 applications, but could only offer 200 places, hence the call for asynchronous cohort. Next slide. So upon completing this course, what opportunities are there? So it could be a good entry point into academic programs. So thinking about bachelor's degrees for those who want to go to undergrad, those who are thinking about fellowships, those who are thinking about graduate degrees or different courses. Also, it could be a good entry point into research placements, especially being able to take up different roles. Most of the time, individuals that lived experience of displacement have been given roles in research as data collectors and enumerators. But we believe with the rich theoretical training that this course gives you, you'll be able to get in and do more than just data collection and enumeration. We also hope that some of the opportunities will be professional, so getting to entry and mid-level careers, publishing opportunities, so being able to broadcast your ideas into different formats, and an exciting bit which might be of interest to many is we have a forthcoming publication series for the Refugee-Led Research Hub, where we'll be taking in different contributions for our blog and also for our research series, which will mainly be taking in reports on empirical research and work in progress, among other pathways. Next slide. So the other part of our hub that I talked about, academic program that I talked about, is the graduate scholarships and application support. I'll start with the end. The applications to join the support scheme will be announced end of September, by end of this week, beginning of October. And what we do is we offer a rich hub of mentors, and that's with support from Oxford students and alumni on application process. So we offer support with feedback on written materials, including statements of purpose, CVs, and writing samples, and scholarship application support. I think we might be all in agreement that making such applications can be quite tedious and quite confusing. So it takes a lot to have support to go through them. And also we'll be running training and workshops. So we'll be having an academic writing workshops to get your personal statements, your writing samples, your CVs, and other application materials ready. And the timeline for this is October to December. For this round, we'll be supporting with University of Oxford, of which applications have opened this September, and they'll be closing in January. Yeah. But we're not limited just to supporting for University of Oxford. Yes, next slide. So in terms of next steps and useful resources, I shared some links that I would be happy to include in the chat box. So one on the Refugee Studies website, where you can read more about refugee and post-migration studies, and also read more about the Refugee Studies Center at University of Oxford. And also within a section there, you'll read more about RLRH and what we've been doing. We also have an active Twitter page, and we request that you follow us and as you communicate different things that we do. And also, if in case of any question and any inquiry, you can reach out to us through study@refugee-led-research.org. And our annual report, there's a link there. You can find it both at the website and I think also through our Twitter page. And yes, if you want to look at more of the activities you've had, you can find them in the links shared. And I've shared these slides with organizers of the conference. I think the next slide is on questions, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. Any questions that anyone might have, I'm happy to respond to them as I share the newly released report.
Stanton?
Sorry, I always have questions. Thank you so much. I was wondering if there's much outreach or crossover between RLRH, RC Pathways, and as well as like with organizations that focus on like the endangerment of journalists, or that track and monitor attacks and violence against journalists, academics, and other professional fields around the world. There's a few organizations, and I was just wondering what the crossover might be.
That's quite interesting to hear. Do you mind just repeating the first bit of your question? You're asking whether there's lots of crossovers between what we do and attacks that are directed towards.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's any crossover or outreach between your organization, your work and your network, as well as if there's any crossover or outreach between your organization and network and organizations that focus on tracking or reporting on or assisting the endangerment of journalists, academics, sometimes of people who report corruption in other professional fields.
Oh, that's quite interesting and insightful. I would say at the moment, no. We're also quite just a young organization, but definitely love to hear more about this and even have conversations going further. Perhaps our approach would be much more like from an academic and research standpoint. Yeah, but really keen to further this conversation. Thank you. I'll note that down.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ruth, for sharing about these programs. And as some of the ELNOR volunteers and staff might know, ELNOR is currently partnering with one of these programs to prepare materials for students who are applying to higher education and job opportunities. So we look forward to continued partnership and If any students that are in the audience have questions for Ruth, please do use the chat. Also, if you're not a student, but you have questions, please do feel free to use the chat. We are now going to move on to the panel section of our conference. And so if I could have all the panelists turn on their cameras just so that the audience can see you and we can begin introductions. Today, we have 3 core questions that we have formed alongside the panelists that talk about the future of humanitarian aid and forced migration. And so before we begin, we will have these panelists introduce themselves and share a little bit